No mystery why and how the campaigns are making these decisions to target specific constituencies here as they make their closing arguments.
Yeah, I mean, that is what they're doing as they try to, get through the next 3 weeks and win this election. I mean, you talk about the former president. He is with women voters talking about abortion. That is not a winning issue for him. He, again, is trying to talk about how it's up to the states. But you have to remember, this is because of a decision that came from the Supreme Court. 3 of the judges that he put in place there. So, again, he is going with this message that we continue to hear from him, that it's in the states and that states are making their own decisions as to what to do next. But, again, this is a difficult argument for him, and he's doing it in front of a constituency he really needs.
Yeah, that's right. And Kamala Harris finally doing the big interview on Fox. Obviously, the stakes are high here. Julie, how much of an impression can she make with less than 3 weeks till the election?
Well, this is obviously an interview that she is doing because the polls have closed and she needs to speak to this constituency. Of course, she's with Republican leaders today, but you're talking about Republican leaders that you may expect to vote for her anyways. They are ones that have already come out and spoke about the former president, saying that he is not the right candidate. So that's no surprise. Now she goes on Fox News because, again, she wants to appeal to this constituency. And it's also a point where she hasn't done a lot of interviews. Now, because of where the polls are, she simply has to.
Yeah. Well, that's right. And we'll all be watching together. Of course, there was an important debate, hits close to home last night for you. Julie, fine. Republican Senator Ted Cruz, Democratic Congressman Colin Allred had a rather heated exchange in their debate for the Texas Senate seat. Let's listen.
But Senator Cruz just called himself pro-life. You're not. You're not pro-life. It's not pro-life to deny women care so long that they can't have children anymore.
Congressman Allred has voted to tell you, a mother at home, you have no right to know if your daughter's getting an abortion. That's an extreme position. And I can tell you the overwhelming majority of Texans do not agree with Congressman Allred.
Julie, new polling from University of Houston out today finds a 4-point lead for Ted Cruz. Does that change after last night? I think we may have lost Julie Fine. Julie, thank you for joining. Texas Bureau Chief, sorry that we lost Julie just at that moment. 4-point advantage over Colin Allred as we now find ourselves in the throes of these Senate debates, more of which we'll be talking about later this week as we turn our focus now to the Middle East, where Israel stepped up airstrikes on Lebanon and says they've killed a senior Hezbollah leader there, as Lebanon's prime minister claims he had been assured by the U.S. that assaults on Beirut would ease. White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre earlier today.
We have told Israel directly that we oppose any Israeli campaign to certainly of near daily strikes in densely populated area in Beirut. You are correct. That is something that we have been very clear about. We also understand that what they're conducting, the operations that they're conducting to destroy Hezbollah infrastructure is targeted. And so we'll continue to have those conversations with the Israeli government.
Joining us now with the latest on the standoff in the Middle East, Bloomberg's Dan Flatley. Dan, thanks for being here. The wait continues on a lot of fronts as we try to get a sense of where Israel is going in its response to Iran. But we're watching intense fighting targeting Beirut once again to the north, and a lot of questions about strategy to the south. This remains a three-front situation in your view. How would you describe it?
Yes, I mean, certainly a lot of things are happening right now in and around Israel, Gaza, the Gaza Strip, and Lebanon, as you said, Joe. And there's a lot. I've sort of been keeping an eye on the oil markets, and we've seen some activity there. But so far, basically with a slowdown in Chinese demand and, sort of some more supply coming online, there really hasn't been as much of a jump as some had expected. But a lot of that has to do with some of the rhetoric, some of the signaling, some of the things that we're hearing both in the U.S. and in Israel about what Israel is likely to target in this response. Right. And so there's been a lot of intense diplomacy, a lot of negotiations, a lot of talk about how Israel should respond. Should they go after military targets? Will they go after oil infrastructure? Will they go after nuclear sites? And basically, the state of play at the moment, as we understand it, is that Israel will respond by targeting Iranian military sites. Those sites associated with the ballistic missile attack that Iran carried out on Israel, and not go after oil infrastructure, not go after nuclear sites. And that's, it's an interesting development. We saw on Friday the U.S. rolled out some new sanctions on Iran's oil industry, and that is part of the discussion here as well. But obviously, still a lot of airstrikes, a lot of fighting, both to Israel's north and to its west in Gaza.
Well, so yeah, as the response plan comes together for Iran, Israel is also facing more pressure over what's happening in Gaza. Is the U.S. about to condition some military aid based on humanitarian assistance? Is that the direction we're going in?
I think that what we're likely to see is, keep in mind, Israel is a very close ally of the United States, obviously. We're in a tense election season. There's a lot of things happening, and we know from what we've seen so far with the Biden administration is they like to move incrementally. So are we going to see a sudden cessation of U.S. supply of arms and ammunition to Israel? Not likely. What you're more likely to see is some sort of signaling to Israel that, you need to take these issues seriously, and there needs to be some more attention paid to the humanitarian situation in Gaza and getting those supplies through. Ultimately, it's going to be up to the Israelis how they want to respond to that, and will they. We saw, the U.S. sent this THAAD missile system, high-altitude missile system, to Israel. So that is conflicting a little bit with this idea that we're going to condition arms supplies to Israel. So there's a lot of things that are moving here. But I think what you're likely to see, to your point, Joe, is an incremental signaling on the part of the U.S. that this humanitarian situation is serious. Israel needs to address it, and if they don't, there may be, you may see some announcements, some slowing down potentially in future shipments, not those that are directly tied to the fighting that's happening now.